I heard the scream before I saw the trash can tip. It was the kind of scream that freezes a parent's blood. Raw, panicked, coming from a child who knows something is terribly wrong. I dropped the rake, sprinted around the corner, and there he was, my 9-year-old son, crawling out of one of those massive green plastic bins, tears cutting through the dirt on his face. And standing 5 feet away, arms crossed like she'd just caught a stray cat, was Karen, head of the HOA. Gatekeeper of neighborhood aesthetics, apparently now part-time enforcer of her own twisted version of justice. He was playing where he shouldn't, she said, as if she were talking about litter, not a human child. That's when something in me shifted. I'd kept my temper in check for years, walked away from countless insults, fines, and passive-aggressive notes taped to my front door. But this wasn't about lawn height or mailbox color. This was my kid. And unfortunately for Karen, she had no idea I was a retired professional MMA fighter. She also didn't know I had video, witnesses, or the quiet, unshakable willpower to bring her down using something far more devastating than fists, the truth. Let me rewind for a second. I didn't move to Whispering Pines to pick a fight. After nearly 15 years in professional mixed martial arts, I was done with blood, sweat, and late-night travel. My wife had passed a few years earlier, and I made a promise to my son. We'd start fresh somewhere calm. Clean air, good schools, quiet streets. And for a while it worked, until Karen showed up with her clipboard and her weaponized neighborhood rules. It started small, a citation for sidewalk chalk, officially labeled a visual disruption to community uniformity. My son had drawn a dinosaur. A pretty good one, too. But apparently, that was a threat to the balance of the subdivision. Then came the fine for leaving his scooter near the walkway. A warning about unsupervised children in shared green spaces. And then, of course, the classic HOA power move, threats of escalation. "I've warned you several times," she said one afternoon while I was mowing the lawn. "If you can't follow our guidelines, perhaps this isn't the right place for your family." I've taken elbows to the face with less fury than what her words triggered in me that day. But I stayed calm. For my son. For the chance to live in peace. I played nice. I didn't argue. Instead, I documented everything. Screenshots of her emails, copies of every fine, photos of my yard perfectly trimmed, the scooter parked neatly, no dinosaur chalk in sight. I'd been preparing for something like this. I just didn't know what it would be. Then came that Sunday. I was working in the garden. My son was playing behind the house, near a small patch of HOA-owned green space. Not private property, not someone's yard, just grass and trees. And then I heard the scream. He told me later she cornered him, yelled that he was trespassing, called him a nuisance. When he tried to run, she grabbed him by the arm, dragged him toward the curb where the trash bins were lined up for collection, and shoved him inside one. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't enforcement. This was abuse. And I didn't need my fists to fight back. What I had was evidence, a neighbor with a Ring doorbell camera, my own security footage facing the green space, and a copy of the HOA bylaws that clearly state children have full access to communal areas with parental permission. I filed a police report, took my son to urgent care, reported the incident to Child Protective Services in the county. And when the HOA responded with a formal letter calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding and warning me about false allegations, I knew I was done playing defense. Karen had thrown a child in a trash can. But she was about to learn what it felt like when someone takes out the garbage, by the book, by the law, and in front of the entire neighborhood. It's funny what you'll tolerate for peace. When I moved into Whispering Pines, I didn't come with an axe to grind. I came with a kid, a lawnmower, and a second chance. I'd spent 15 years inside steel cages with men who wanted to break my ribs. And I was tired of travel, tired of pain, tired of constantly being on guard. This was supposed to be our quiet life, our clean slate. And for about 3 weeks, it was until Karen showed up. The first time we met, I was setting up a basketball hoop for my son, one of those rolling ones with a sand-filled base. He was 9 and could barely make a layup, but you'd think I'd parked a broken-down Winnebago on the lawn from the look she gave me. She didn't say hello. She said, "That's not allowed." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "The hoop." Temporary recreational structures require board approval. Page 14, Section D. I was polite. I smiled. I told her I'd review the guidelines. I moved it to the driveway. Still got a notice in the mail the next day. That's how it started. First it was the hoop, then the chalk drawings, dinosaurs, smiley faces, hopscotch squares, labeled visual disorder in the letter. After that, the scooter left by the front porch, not in the designated storage area. Then the Halloween decorations. One skeleton, one pumpkin, and a ghost made of a bedsheet. Holiday displays must be tasteful and approved. I began to see a pattern. Every time my son existed outdoors, we got a citation. And not a single one of those notices came from a neighbor's complaint. I asked around. Most of them didn't even know the rules Karen was enforcing. But Karen knew. Karen wrote them. You see, Karen wasn't just the HOA president. She'd also been on the Architectural Review Board, the Social Committee, and apparently self-appointed herself the Community Wellness Liaison, which I'm still pretty sure is a title she made up. She was everywhere, at every meeting, in every email chain. Every rule had her fingerprints on it. She was the judge, the jury, and the self-declared decorator chief. But I didn't bite. I didn't fight. I'd learned enough from the ring to know that the first one to throw a punch is often the one who loses. I let it slide. I paid the small fines. I stored every notice in a folder labeled HOA Evidence. And I started talking to neighbors. An older woman named Ruth told me Karen once fined her for growing marigolds instead of HOA-approved begonias. Another neighbor, Tom, said he got a $50 penalty for painting his shed the same color as his house, apparently the wrong tone of beige. People were tired, but they were scared. Karen had a way of making examples out of those who spoke up. Tom's lawn was mysteriously flagged for invasive weeds 2 weeks after he questioned her at a meeting. Ruth's fence was suddenly deemed nonconforming after she emailed the board about her flower citation. This wasn't community management. It was tyranny with a name tag. Still, I kept quiet until that Sunday. My son wasn't even near someone's house. He was on the border of our property in a small community green space. It's not fenced off, not posted, just trees and grass, like a tiny patch of forest left untouched behind the homes. Karen claimed he was trespassing. And then she did something I'll never forget. She grabbed him by the wrist, dragged him toward the trash bins, and shoved my 9-year-old inside one. He tried to climb out. She slammed the lid. The neighbor's security camera didn't catch the moment it happened, but it caught the scream. It caught the lid flipping open. It caught him crawling out, dirt and tears and shame all over his face. And it caught me racing toward them, heart in my throat. Karen didn't flinch, didn't even act surprised. She crossed her arms like she was the victim. He was where he shouldn't be, she said. I've fought men twice my size in sold-out arenas. I've broken bones and taken beatings most people would pass out from. But in that moment, it took everything I had not to lose control. Instead, I walked past her, picked up my son, and took him home. I documented the bruises, took photos, recorded his statement word for word, just like my attorney friend later told me to. Then I filed a police report, took him to urgent care, logged the medical bill. I sent a copy of the evidence to the HOA. 2 days later, they responded with a printed letter on HOA stationery. We regret the unfortunate misunderstanding that occurred on Sunday. The board reminds all residents to refrain from escalating matters through false or exaggerated claims. Repeated misuse of HOA communication channels may result in penalties. They weren't just dismissing the incident, they were threatening me. That's when I stopped waiting. I called my lawyer, filed a formal complaint with the county, and began building something far stronger than a punch, a case. And Karen kept walking around the neighborhood like nothing happened. She thought she'd silenced another resident, scared another father into submission. What she didn't know was that I'd been preparing since the first chalk fine. I had photos. I had footage. I had people, neighbors ready to speak up now that someone else finally had the guts to stand in the spotlight. Karen wasn't just about to lose a power trip. She was about to lose the illusion that she was power. And the best part? She wouldn't see it coming. If you think this was wild, Wait till you hear what Karen did next. There's a special kind of silence that settles over a neighborhood when things get serious. Not the peaceful, birds chirping, Sunday morning kind. I'm talking about the kind that hangs in the air like humidity before a thunderstorm, thick, tense, waiting for something to break. That was the vibe on my street after word started spreading about the trash can incident. People didn't say it out loud, but they were talking behind hedges, over fences at the dog park, whispering about what Karen did to my son, wondering what I would do next. Karen, on the other hand, strutted around like nothing happened. She waved at neighbors, tended her roses, even hosted an HOA coffee chat on her porch the following weekend, complete with muffins and freshly squeezed orange juice, like she hadn't thrown a kid into a garbage bin just days before. That Sunday morning, I walked by with Jake, my Labrador, and nodded politely at the small group gathered around her. I didn't stop, but I saw a few eyes flick toward me. One woman even mouthed, "I'm sorry," as I passed. They knew. They were just scared. But fear only works until someone stands up. And I was standing now. First, I filed a formal grievance with the HOA, citing violations of safety, abuse of authority, and misconduct. I attached the security footage, the medical report from urgent care, and a letter from my lawyer. The HOA responded with their usual canned language. Asterisk, the board will review the matter internally. Asterisk translation, delay, deny, deflect. Fine. I wasn't waiting anymore. I filed a complaint with the county. Karen had claimed my son was trespassing on private HOA land, but the area in question was actually classified as public use common space under county zoning laws. That meant she had no legal authority to remove anyone from it, especially not a 9-year-old child. Second, I started reaching out to other neighbors, quietly at first. I knocked on doors, had casual porch conversations. Most were hesitant, a few even dismissive. But slowly, the stories began to surface. One man told me Karen fined him for non-standard gutter guards. Another said she threatened to report him to local authorities for operating a home business because he taught piano lessons to 2 kids on Saturday afternoons. One woman got a citation for putting up a bird feeder. Apparently, the HOA handbook claimed they could attract undesirable wildlife. But the one that hit hardest was Don, a widowed veteran. He showed me a letter Karen had sent him, demanding he repaint his home trim because it reflected a lack of youthful energy. Don was 79. His wife had passed just 6 months earlier. He hadn't even taken down her garden flags yet. That's when I knew Karen wasn't just power-hungry. She was cruel. And I wasn't the only one who saw it. The video of my son, the clip from the Ring camera next door, had made its way around. It wasn't violent in the traditional sense, but it was damning. You could see Karen dragging him off screen. Then the trash can tipping over moments later. You could hear him crying. You could hear her voice, cold, sharp, say, asterisk, "You're being taught a lesson." Asterisk. It didn't take long for the video to land on Facebook. And once it did, the silence broke. Comments poured in. Asterisk. "Is this the Whispering Pines HOA lady? This is disgusting. I know her. She tried to find me for wind chimes." Asterisk. The local news station picked it up the next day. Asterisk. HOA president under fire after incident with child. Asterisk. They reached out for comment. Karen declined. I didn't. I stood on my porch in a plain polo shirt, my son beside me, and told the truth. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply said, asterisk, this isn't about HOA rules. This is about basic decency. And if the people in charge can't tell the difference, they shouldn't be in charge. Asterisk. That's when things really shifted. An anonymous petition began circulating online, demanding Karen's removal from the board. It reached over 200 signatures in 48 hours, more than half the community. Still, the HOA board refused to act. Karen still held power. And she wasn't going quietly. On Tuesday morning, I received a notice from the HOA claiming I had violated community policy by causing public disruption and negative media attention that could harm property values. Yes, really. They tried to fine me for speaking out about what happened to my son. That was their mistake. Because that notice crossed into retaliation. And retaliation is legally actionable under most HOA governance laws. I passed it directly to my attorney, and we filed a formal cease and desist for harassment. Meanwhile, the board tried to rally behind her. But the neighborhood wasn't buying it anymore. People started showing up to meetings, people who hadn't set foot in the clubhouse in years. They weren't loud or violent, just done being quiet. At the next monthly meeting, the room was packed. Karen stood at the front table, flipping through papers, trying to maintain control. She opened with her usual line. Asterisk, let's begin with updates from the maintenance committee. Asterisk. Someone cut her off. We're not here for leaves and light bulbs, a man said from the back. Asterisk. We're here because you assaulted a child, and you think we're just going to move on? Asterisk. The room went still. Karen's face flushed. You're out of order, she snapped. Asterisk. This is not the time for personal attacks. Asterisk. Asterisk, is that what you call it? Asterisk, another woman said. Asterisk, a personal attack? What about everything you've done to all of us? Asterisk. It snowballed. People stood up one after another, sharing their stories. Some brought letters. Some brought photos. One woman brought a stack of fines, so thick, she had to use a binder clip. Karen tried to talk over them, tried to adjourn the meeting, but even her allies on the board looked rattled. They could see the writing on the wall. One of them finally motioned for a vote, not to remove Karen yet, but to call a special session where the entire community could decide her fate. It passed unanimously. Karen stormed out before the meeting ended. The last thing I saw was her red blazer disappearing down the sidewalk. That night, I sat on the porch with my son. Asterisk, you okay? Asterisk, I asked. He nodded. Asterisk, can I draw on the sidewalk again? Asterisk. I laughed. Asterisk, yeah, bud. I think it's time we got the chalk back out. Asterisk. Because Karen had ruled through fear and silence. But silence was over now. The community was just getting started. If you think this part was intense, wait until you see what happened when the neighborhood turned the tables for good. The special session was set for Thursday evening at the clubhouse. This wasn't a formality. This wasn't an HOA meeting tucked away on page 6 of the newsletter. It was the main event, a reckoning. By 7 o'clock, the room was full. Standing room only full. People brought chairs from their garages. Someone brought a cooler of iced tea and paper cups. A man named Walter even set up a projector, because this time we had visuals. I sat near the back with my son. Not because I wanted to be quiet, but because I wanted to give the spotlight to the people who had been stepped on, fined, and ignored for years. Tonight they would speak. Karen arrived just before the meeting started, flanked by 2 of her longtime board loyalists. She wore her usual sharp red blazer, pearls, and an expression that had all the warmth of a DMV clerk with a god complex. No smile, no wave, no pretense. The room quieted. And then the stories began. Don, the widowed veteran, went first. He held up the letter Karen had sent him, demanding he repaint his trim because it was too depressing. His voice trembled, but his words were clear. Asterisk, she said my home looked like I'd given up on life. My wife had passed away 3 months earlier. She knew that. Asterisk. You could hear a pin drop. Then came Ruth, the marigold lady. She told the room that Karen had threatened to dig up her flower bed if she didn't comply with HOA guidelines. Her crime? Non-regulation bloom density. Even people who had stayed silent for years were stepping forward. Someone brought photos of the non-compliant wreath they'd been fined $75 for during the holidays. A father stood up and said Karen had reported his teenager to the police for loitering in their own driveway. Then Walter hit the lights and turned on the projector. The ring footage played again. Karen dragging my son. The trash can tipping. The scream. And then her voice. Asterisk, you're being taught a lesson. Asterisk. It was damning. No excuses. No editing. Just truth, raw and unblinking. When the lights came back on, all eyes turned to Karen. She stood, smoothed her blazer, and tried to salvage control. This community has thrived under my leadership, she said. Asterisk, order and standards are what keep this place beautiful. And sometimes, tough decisions must be made for the greater good. Asterisk. She paused, waiting for applause. There was none. A voice from the crowd cut through the silence. Asterisk. Is that what you call this? Leadership? Asterisk. The murmurs turned to rumbling. Karen raised her voice. Asterisk. Let's not forget that property values have increased under this HOA's careful guidance. I've ensured compliance. I've upheld the quorum. Asterisk. Asterisk. You've abused people. Asterisk. Someone shouted. Asterisk. You threw a kid in a trash can? Asterisk, said another. Karen's mask cracked. Asterisk. I did what needed to be done. Asterisk, she snapped. Asterisk. That boy was disrespecting common property. His father. Asterisk. That's when I stood. I didn't yell. I didn't pace. I just looked at her and said one sentence. Asterisk. Your reign is over. Asterisk. Then I walked to the front and passed out printed packets, summaries of over 30 documented violations of HOA procedure, misuse of authority, and personal retaliation, each signed by multiple residents. My attorney, seated in the front row, nodded once. The board had no choice. They opened the floor for the recall vote. It passed by a landslide. Karen was officially removed as HOA president. Her allies resigned on the spot. By law, a temporary committee would take over until a new election could be held. The community cheered, not out of spite, but out of sheer relief. Karen didn't stay to hear the vote totals. She left mid-meeting, stiff and silent, eyes staring forward like she was walking into traffic. That was the last time she stood at the head of anything in Whispering Pines. 3 days later, a moving truck pulled into her driveway. She didn't say goodbye. But justice had been served, publicly, thoroughly. Weeks later, I got a letter from the HOA. An official apology. They reversed every fine I had ever received. My son was offered a scholarship to a local art camp, donated anonymously by someone in the community. And the sidewalk? It's now a community chalk space. Kids draw on it daily. No citations. No complaints. Just color.